Hello, this is Chris Heasley with the Chris Heasley Radio Show. We are taught that regardless of how insane, absurd, toxic, and increasingly ridiculous their agenda becomes, we must reach across the aisle and shake the hands of our esteemed colleagues on the other side. Regardless of how dangerous and harmful the Democrats' agenda becomes to the people of Texas, the people of America, to the people of the world, to mankind, regardless of how dangerous and harmful their agenda becomes, we must shake the hand of our esteemed colleagues on the other side. And let's be clear, the Democrat agenda, there is not a single element of the Democrat agenda that is in the interest of the people of Texas. There is nothing in it that is in the interest of humanity overall. The Democrat agenda, every single element is adverse to our rights, to our interests. It's adverse to Americans, to Texans. Because the Democrat agenda aligns with the globalist agenda. And the globalist agenda is an agenda that comes from the European billionaire class, a set of men that have incredible amounts of influence in this world, and they have sprinkled money over the Democrat Party for the past 2 decades, and they have attained ownership of the Democrat Party. And so now the Democrat Party is aligned with their interests, with the interest of the globalist agenda. And these men are not a well-grounded set of men. They're not mentally sound. They're not healthy men. They're men that have interests that are completely adverse to us. They are not interested in your rights. They are not interested in your well-being. They have no interest in a conversation on the United States Constitution. That is not their interests. Their interests are returning us to a time of about 400 years ago, a time when there were kings and queens and monarchies. There was an aristocracy and there was peasants. There was peasantry. And they intend for them to serve as the aristocracy in perpetuity and for us to be returned to a peasant status. This is what they intend to do, and they intend to erode our rights, and they intend to erode our purchasing power, our wealth, and our quality of life. This is the agenda of the globalists and the Democrat Party, and I will give you just a couple of quick examples of how the Democrat Party today is carrying out the globalist agenda against your interests, one of which is the phasing out of our energy-rich oil and gas sector. Just 4 years ago, this country was developing oil and gas to a point where we were completely self-sufficient. We were not dependent on any foreign sources of oil. Not only were we self-sufficient, but we were actually exporting oil. But the Democrats came into office and they stated quite clearly that it would be the end of that. And they began the phasing out process, which means that they will not allow for further permitting of oil and gas, development and exploration. It's the beginning of the phasing out. As a result of this, we have incurred a 58% year-over-year increase in gas prices. On top of that, the Democrats have, ready to go, proposed new taxes to hit you at the pump. This is Democrat policy coming through the pump, hitting you square in your wallet and eroding your quality of life. That's why every time you swipe that credit card and you feel that tinge of stress when you're filling up your tank, that's the Democrats. The Democrats did that to you, and that is one example. Another example, the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is an institution that is also aligned with the globalists. It's a partner to the American Democrat Party. And what the Federal Reserve has done, it has raised interest rates 11 times in just over a year. It has raised interest rates 6 percentage points in just over a year. That is a hit on the economy never incurred before, not even in the Great Depression. Not even in 1929 did Americans have a hit to that extent. This is something that's never been happened before. And what that's caused is 11 straight months of housing sale declines. But in addition to that, of course, it's created an upward pressure on housing costs, on your rent, on your mortgages. But that type of hike has hit us at a foundational level. It's placed an upward pressure on all costs in our lives, everything from a stick of gum to a loaf of bread to a gallon of milk. Everything has gone up while Americans are on fixed incomes. So the Democrats have put Americans in a pinch. Our expenses are growing, our income is waning, and we continue to have outrageous inflation. Another example of Democrat policy, the Nord Stream pipeline. The Nord Stream pipeline is a pipeline in Europe. It feeds the Europeans with essential natural gas to ensure that they can stay warm in the cold European winter months. And what happened is that the Democrats began to signal that this pipeline would go away as part of their opposition to a sovereign country, their opposition to Russia. The Democrats, they are at a loggerhead with Russia and Russians because the Russians do not agree with the globalist agenda. And when you do not agree with the globalist agenda, you will find yourselves in the crosshairs of the American Democrat Party. So the American Democrat Party, your political party, has waged a war on a sovereign country. They've waged a war with the Russians. And this is not a war between the Ukraine and Russia. This is a proxy war where the Democrat Party has used the Ukraine as an excuse to go to war with Russia. And the Democrats began to signal that this pipeline would go away, and then it did. In an explosion, it was detonated. It was destroyed. It was the greatest act of terrorism since 9/11. And worldwide, it is generally safe to say that most people conclude it was the Democrats that did it. The Democrats that potentially did the greatest act of that kind since 9/11. And I want that to, before we start talking about the economic consequences of that, I want that to sink in. To the extent of which they will go to implement the globalist agenda, the extent to they will go to erode society, to erode the quality of life, to hurt people. That's the agenda. But let's go ahead and talk about the economic consequences of the destruction of this essential gas pipeline in Europe. So that means that now Europeans have less access to essential natural gas to keep their homes warm at night. And that means that if they are not able to supplement for that, they have to call on us, and we have to feed them that natural gas. And of course, it was most likely our government that caused this issue. So of course, we will have to send it. That means that your gas prices will go up because of American Democrat policy. That is American Democrat policy. But you see, the Democrats are brilliant. And what they've done something that is essentially brilliant. You see, they understand and recognize that Joe Biden is a failed man. He's a failed man. He's a failed president, and virtually nobody supports him any longer. Everybody knows this. Everybody knows this. The Democrats know this. He is an acknowledged embarrassment to the country, and the world knows this. So what the Democrats do is while they push the globalist agenda, they put all of the disastrous results on it on Joe Biden's head, so that he goes down with the sinking ship and they live to fight another day. That's what your Democrats have done. While they push this globalist agenda, they are effectively creating a separation between themselves and Joe Biden. But you see, that's at the national level. And at the local level, here in Fort Bend and Harris counties, your Democrats locally, they also are aligned with the globalist agenda. And it can be argued that their affront on the citizenry is even greater than Joe Biden's because they live in our neighborhoods. They are our neighbors. They walk in our parks. They drive on our roads. We see them at the grocery store, and they are taking steps to hurt us. That's what your local Democrats are doing. You see, when the Democrat Party nationally goes awry, it is up to your local Democrats to keep that party honest and to confront it. Their allegiances and their alliances should be with the local citizens first and the Democrat Party second. And they should be confronting that party. But they aren't. And I'll just give you a couple of quick examples. One of which is Lizzie Fletcher, U.S. Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher, Congresswoman for the Bel Air, Westview, Sunnyside, Sharpstown area. And what she is advocating for is more taxes at the gas pump. It's part of the Inflation Reduction Act, which she supports, and it includes additional taxes at the gas pump. So that's one example, but I'll give you another example. Fort Bend County, your Democrat state representative, Ron Reynolds. Ron Reynolds, while the country's imploding, while our planet is, our country's turning upside down, Ron Reynolds stumps against the Second Amendment. He stumps against your right for self-defense. He's initiating a gun confiscation effort while our country is imploding. I'll give you one more example. Cynthia Ginyard, the head of the Fort Bend County Democrat Party. And while all of this is happening, she is mysteriously silent. She's mysteriously silent because her career is tied to the globalist agenda. And I want to do a thought exercise for you. I want you to consider something. Imagine that the situation was reversed and that our local Democrats were actually out there fighting for us. Imagine if Lizzie Fletcher took a Ron Paul stance and began exposing the Federal Reserve, exposing their interest rate hike scams that they pull on us regularly. Imagine if Lizzie Fletcher was using every second of airtime to expose that. Imagine what a great contribution that would be. Imagine if Ron Reynolds was stumping for more jobs in the oil and gas energy sector. Imagine if he was demanding that we become energy self-sufficient once again. Imagine that. Imagine if Cynthia Ginyard was taking a moral stance against the Democrats' war with Russia. Imagine that. We would all support them. But that isn't the case because they are tied to the globalist agenda. And the truth is that we continue to place our activism at the federal level. We continue to place our activism at the federal level, and the local Democrats get a pass. But you see, that is not the best bang for our buck. That is not the best use of our time, the use of our energy, because for some reason, the federal level, they are insulated. Regardless of how unpopular their agenda is, they are moving forward with it. Whereas your local Democrats who live in your neighborhoods are completely vulnerable to activism. They're completely vulnerable to it. And so this is the Chris Heasley Show. And the entire premise of this show is to get the citizens of Fort Bend and Harris counties active politically at the local level. And if we are able to do that, if we are able to get ourselves activated at the local, in the few short instances where citizens have activated, we have slowed down the movement of the Democrats, and we've put them in sort of a stalemate position. And so the minute that we begin activating in that regard, we will have a greater use of our time. We will have a greater use of our resources, our ability, our energies, and our times. Today on the Chris Heasley Show, we have two guests. We have Bobby Eberle, the Fort Bend County GOP chairman. And on the line, we have G2. G2 is an activist, a freedom activist out of the United States Midwest. And with that being said, I want to start off with Bobby. Bobby, how are you doing today?
Great, man. Thanks for having me on. It's cool, and congratulations on the show. I hear really good things, and so I'm honored to be here as a guest.
Good. Well, hey, thank you very much for being on. But I'd like to start off with my assessment of the Nord Stream bombing. It was quite a charged assessment, and I want to ask your opinion. Do you think I got it right?
Yeah, well, I love the monologue. I mean, I was taking notes as we went along, but as far as Nord Stream, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, here we have natural gas. I mean, we saw what it is doing and has done for the U.S. economy, and now you've got this pipeline that is feeding this energy to our allies, basically. But the Democrats, the left, have such a target that they want to bring down Russia. It's like their boogeyman. They want to go after him. That they are willing to destroy the economies of our allies in order to go after this false flag, this Russian enemy, when our true enemy is the leftist movement in communist China by far. And so you see what it's going to do. It's going to drive up energy prices there. The left the Democrats want to get rid of fossil fuels in general, and now we are selling to them to replace what they've lost at these huge prices, which affects our prices right here. I mean, it drives the Americans, everyday Americans, away from the very fuels that they need, the resources they need to get their kids to school and to get to work and everything. Oh, but the remedy is to buy an electric car. That's, tens of thousands more than they can afford. It's just nuts. But you really hit it on the head. It is a destabilizing effort in the European economy that is designed to, one, jack up prices here, make Europe more dependent on us and more easier to step away from Russia in that alliance. Obviously, if you're getting your fuel and your energy from a particular nation, you're going to invest in that nation. You're going to have diplomatic relations and try to make the relationship even stronger. And this is just one other way to drive a wedge in those relations.
So, have you seen any activism at the local level? You're the Fort Bend County GOP chairman. Regarding the Democrats in Fort Bend County, have you seen them take any stance against the Nord Stream pipeline? Or let me make a more broad question.
Yep.
Have you seen them take any stance in favor of domestic oil and gas energy production, or are they touting the green new energy deal?
Well, they are all in. I mean, totally push all their chips in on the green agenda, which we know the green agenda is not about anything that any type of tag word that a Democrat will use on a policy. It's usually the opposite, because it's not about being renewable. It's not about protecting the environment. It's about power and control and keeping the general person more dependent on government. I mean, this whole idea of electric cars where you can't go more than, you can't really go out of your city boundaries without having to recharge. People don't think about it that much, but that is a symbol of freedom. Just getting in your car and being able to drive where you want, fill up at the gas station real quick and keep on going, that is a symbol of freedom right there. And you throw people in electric vehicles, and you saw the charging issues that you had in the Midwest, where G2 is, and you couldn't even recharge the batteries. Forget how long it takes, but you couldn't do it. And so the Democrats here locally, they are all in on that agenda. We are the energy capital of the United States, and their policies directly affect those people working in these industries. So it makes no difference if you're Indian, Pakistani, you name it. If you work in that sector, the Democrats are actively trying to get you out of business and hurt your ability to provide for your family.
Right. And, sorry, we're having technical difficulties getting G2 online. We'll get him online in just a minute. But, okay, so we have this war with Russia, and now it's obviously affected our country in so many ways. It's affected the citizens of Fort Bend County and Harris County. And it would be so nice if our county officials were out there stumping against this war, because any last dollar that we have, any last dollar that's in your pocket after the inflation, after the gas prices, after a deteriorating economy, any last dollar, the Democrats are pulling that dollar from your pocket, and they are sending it to feed this bloody war with the Ukraine. I'd like to point out today, the American Democrats' war with with Russia. The American Democrats' war with Russia has cost the world 350,000 dead Ukrainians. It is essentially an ethnic genocide in our midst. Where do the county Democrats stand? I'll tell you where they stand. Well, in Fort Bend County, we have a county judge. And what the county judge is, he's basically an operations manager. That's what he is. He's hired to ensure the roads are working, the fire trucks are gassed up, the emergency services are online. That's his job. And what our county judge in Fort Bend, his name is KP George, what he views himself as now is sort of an international figure, an international diplomat. And he has called for the expulsion of the Russian consulate. The Russian consulate. Okay, so I want to explain this. So in Fort Bend County, we have a considerable Russian population. And what KP George, the Fort Bend County chairman, the Fort Bend County judge did to ensure that the Fort Bend County is in line with the globalist agenda. And I want to make this clear. The people of Fort Bend reject the globalist agenda. It is only county officials that are on board with this thing. So what he does is he calls for the expulsion of the Russian consulate. And what that means is that our Russian population, our Russian citizens, they are dependent on that consulate for international travel to go back home and see their families, to ensure everything happens without issue. KP George wants that gone. Did he once ask the citizens of Fort Bend County if they want that action to be taken? Did he once meet with the Russian citizens in Fort Bend to see if they want that action taken? No, he did not. What he did is he got his facts from the DNC, and that fax first came from probably Europe, from Switzerland or wherever the globalists hang out. The World Economic Forum is
Davos.
Davos. Thank you very much, sir. That fax came from Davos, came right from George Soros, through the DNC to KP George's desk, and he posted it as an official proclamation for Fort Bend County, as if the people of Fort Bend County have an issue with a sovereign country. Okay? So the point is that local Democrats, your county Democrats, are on board with the globalist agenda, and they are not on, and the globalist agenda is completely adverse to your rights, and it will end when we decide to get active. G2, are you on the line?
I am.
Excellent. Very good. I want to ask you something. I'm not sure if you heard my intro, but essentially what I did is I said, I concluded that based on the fact that the Democrats were signaling that with this American Democrat Party's war with Russia, they were signaling that the Nord Stream pipeline would end, it would go away, and poof, it went away in the greatest act of terrorism since 9/11. And I stated that it is safe to say that the world has concluded that is most likely the actions of American Democrats. Am I off base on that, or what do you think?
Well, they clearly said that if there wasn't compliance, that they would destroy Nord Stream, and then Nord Stream was destroyed. So you have to ask yourself, who had the capability? Well, that's a nation state. There's not some random small group of terrorists that could do that. And then secondly, who had the motivation? Well, they called it out. So it was pretty quickly figured out that that was the U.S. government or its allies working on behalf of the globalists that control that Democrat Party, right? So that's really who it is, the globalists. And why? Well, doing that cut off a vital supply of energy to Germany. And that caused Germans' overall energy costs to go up, shifted more of their dependence to these high-cost, low-reliability methods of generating energy that they say are green, which aren't green at all. And then it also made Europe more dependent upon LNG exports from the United States, which have only been happening for the last few years, as many people in Houston would know. 30 years ago, 20 years ago, there were no LNG exports from the U.S. So by putting international pressure on the U.S. natural gas market, you make sure there's a floor into the price for U.S. gas, too, where at one point, markets that are isolated sometimes have an advantage. So there was an Alberta advantage to natural gas for a long time because Alberta, Canada, that area had a lot of natural gas but no pipeline to get it out. As soon as they had a pipeline, the cost of natural gas in Alberta normalized with the market in the U.S. Well, now the U.S. is going to have to normalize with the market in the world. So the implications of blowing up that pipeline were, A, they created an environmental catastrophe that released more CO2 than any other event outside of a volcano, a massive volcano. Second, they cut off Germany and Europe from a critical energy supply and drove up Germany's energy costs, drove up America's energy costs. Well, what happened to Russia? These sanctions and the attack on that pipeline were supposed to hurt Russia. Russia turned around and sold its energy into the open markets outside of the United States, outside of Europe, and actually got higher prices. So that's why if you look back to the beginning of this war, you'll see that the ruble collapsed and then quickly recovered. And now the Russian economy is doing just fine. Well, in large part, that's because the sanctions and the blowing up of that Nord Stream pipeline actually, unexpectedly to the globalists, helped Russia. But there's no question, Russia did not blow up its own pipeline, its major artery to a major market with more than 350 million people in it for its critical export natural gas. Russia didn't blow up its own multi-billion-dollar asset that took years to build. That was the U.S. operating with its proxies. It's crystal clear.
So it's sort of interesting. I think everyone should know. Everyone should know that Lizzie Fletcher has regularly advocated for more funding of this bloody engagement. So what G2 is saying is that while worldwide we're blowing up the infrastructure of our foreign allies, Lizzie Fletcher continues to stump for more funding of this bloody engagement. Did you have something to say, Bobby?
No, I mean, the analysis is great, and we see how the American people are starting to see through this, right? You have the Democrats, and I love how you're bringing this home, bringing it locally, but the Democrats keep pushing this funding to push that agenda. I mean, it was so insulting when we come out with a $118 billion border bill, and $95 billion of it is foreign aid, mostly to Ukraine. That fails because there was really no border security in it. So what do the Republicans and Democrats in the Senate do? They say, man, you know what? We got the message. We're going to focus on the border thing, really do it right. No, they push that aside and just push the foreign aid package, $61 billion for Ukraine to keep this going. And the blowback from that, we'll see, what eventually happens in the House. But these Democrats, both nationally and locally, need to be taken to task because they are not representing their constituents. Back here at home, they don't need to be making proclamations, pro-Ukraine. How about getting the roads and getting our districts like they should, instead of, like you said, getting talking points from the DNC or whatever the messed up Harris County Democrats are doing? It seems to follow in Fort Bend. Fort Bend residents deserve better than that.
Well, I think one thing that we're sort of exposing is that county Democrats, these are county officials, they're essentially, like I said, they're operations managers. They're hired to run the roads. They're hired to run the schools. They're hired to make sure that our towns and cities are copacetic. And they're taking issues on foreign matters. They are elevating themselves to some sort of an international status. And it just shows the bloviated egos that they have. Now, when they begin attaining those egos, the next thing that comes with it is bloated budgets, because go, please, G2, please, we want to hear what you say.
So Bobby, you made a really interesting and important point there, which is that this bill that was supposed to be for the border, in fact, guaranteed a continuation of a significant amount of illegal aliens flowing across the border, as always brought by the cartels who make a lot of money bringing them over, who control our border. And the minimum number was about 1.8 million a year locked in, more than we ever should support.
That's right.
And why was there any money in that bill? We don't need money to go defend the border. It is the government's number one function. Their most important, primary, and simple function is to defend the borders of the nation. And so you're telling me that they're saying, we're going to put forward a bill, we're going to lie to you and say it's somehow going to protect the border. It will not. We're going to wrap in that a whole bunch of money that we're going to launder through these foreign battlefields, because we all know that a lot of that comes back to the politicians in the United States, one way or the other. And if you won't do it, we're going to drop the border altogether, because we're never going to defend this nation, but we are going to keep trying to launder money. The fact that the American people understood that that bill was not a border protection bill, that they saw through the charade, and that the bill died before it ever made it out of committee, that is a really significant victory for the citizens of the United States. For the American people, that is a big win.
Yeah, it really is, and I mean I was, you get skeptical a little bit. I'm a very optimistic guy. I'm rah. I try to inspire people, but it gets to you. You feel like you're sometimes on the losing end, and to see that come and see people see through the rhetoric, because what would Biden and all of these others say? Oh, well, we're going to pay for this, X many more Border Patrol agents and everything like that. Well, okay. Sure, but what are you going to have them doing? Not protecting the border.
Right.
They just want them to process more people. Yeah, let's hire more so we can process more illegals, and then you see these cases of people dying either through drugs or murder, and they just want to keep it going. But I love that they didn't fall for that, hey, we're going to hire more people. Well, no, it's hiring more just to serve your own needs of processing people that are clearly abusing the asylum procedures. Just to funnel this in, and it goes back to this Marxist disruption of order that we're seeing, mass migration worldwide.
Absolutely. And to be clear, you're not just guessing. In the language of the bill, it talked about increasing spending and personnel in different departments of the government to process the illegal aliens, not to stop them, not to block the border.
Exactly.
Just to process them. So that is why they only wanted this bill to be available for a few hours for anyone to read before it was supposed to be voted on. And again, the fact that it failed is a huge victory. One other quick point. You mentioned a minute ago these county officials acting like they're not responsible for just roads and bridges and making sure the election process is secure and operates efficiently, but rather they're now getting involved in geopolitical issues. Here's what's coming next. In Canada, I was speaking with some folks from Canada this week, and in Canada, the United Nations is now working directly with county-level officials to implement the United Nations plan. They're certainly dealing with the Canadian federal government and the provincial governments, but they're coming down to local towns and counties and equivalents up there to implement this plan. So you're seeing here at this point just these local folks abandoning their responsibility for roads, bridges, and elections and becoming people who want to decide whether you could use a bag to haul groceries and, issuing proclamations about foreign wars, which they have no business doing. But the UN is coming. Whatever they're doing in Canada, they'll be doing in Texas in 3 years if we don't stop them.
Well, I don't know if county residents know this, but just a few years ago, Fort Bend County officials began deploying something equivalent to CCP facial recognition software at county offices, CCP meaning the Chinese Communist Party. So when you go to China, on every corner of every street, there is facial recognition cameras, facial recognition technology everywhere documenting every single move that you make. And of course, in Fort Bend County, you cannot build Rome in a day. They have to move slower. So they were trial ballooning it. They were testing it out to see if they could get away with it. They started deploying it at county offices. So if you entered a courthouse or whatever, you were confronted with this robotic voice that told you to hold still for a second while it appeared to be taking a picture of you. That's what happened. Now, to get to the point that local activism is the best bang for your buck, what happened is citizens exposed this. They exposed it, they began talking about it, and all of these machines were removed. So, but I was going to ask Tom.
Well, that's another great victory. And victories are, not necessarily frequent, but we got to recognize each one. It's another victory. There's only one force in the world capable of stopping this globalist takeover of the United States, and it's the American people, who still have a tremendous amount of power through the freedoms that are protected by the Constitution. We all know the Constitution's under assault, but it's still there. Mm-hmm. And if we act, and if we don't just sit by and let all these things happen, we have to reach out to our elected officials and take these simple actions. If we do that in large volumes, we will affect outcomes. So that's actually seems like maybe a small victory. It's significant to get any government agency at any level, local, state, or federal, to actually pay attention to their constituents. In these days, that's a win.
To follow up on the point that where I believe that citizens are becoming cynical now in a good way. And what I mean is that when the politicians say, oh, we're addressing inflation with the Inflation Reduction Act, the citizens, they open that act up and they see that it is an Inflation Acceleration Act. And the other thing is, for example, with this wall, what the politicians will do is they'll basically throw money at it. They'll say, hey, I voted for more expenditures on that. And so what they do, they're real good at spending your money. They'll throw money on it and then say that, their work's done. Well, they don't take ownership in building a wall. And I think that what citizens need to do is hold them accountable. Spending my money isn't good enough. You have to get the job completed. Bobby, were you going to say something?
Well, no, I was just, it's just interesting how all of this ties together, with the spending and bringing it back home locally, because, the other thing you hit on in your monologue that I thought was right on is that spending and the debt that we're accruing, because again, that is power away from the people. If they're beholden on government, whether it's huge taxes or debts that they owe, or suffering from these interest rates, all of that decreases their freedom. And I'm happy that the economy is one of those major issues, along with the border, that people keep coming back to and are going to hold Biden to the fire, because he'll throw out something like real wages are going up or whatever, which is debatable on its face. But then when you factor in some of the things you said in your monologue, energy prices, inflation, interest rates, that wipes out any of those gains right there, to where people they have less and they know it. I mean, they absolutely know it. For the first time in history, we're facing $1 trillion in credit card debt, because the American people, have gotten to this point where it's like, okay, the situation's so bad, at least let's fake it. Let's pretend we're doing okay, and they'll go buy something. So they're not buying it because they have more purchasing power. They're putting it on the credit card, and again, that's going to come back and get them as well. But we face this fear where, this situation where that's their only recourse right now. The other recourse is coming. That's November. That's
Right.
in the ballot,
That's
and
right.
and hopefully they'll make the right choice.
Well, the Democrats.
Go
ahead, please. You two, please go.
You make it's a critical point. This debt piece is a really critical point. So think about this: if the government had to come out to the American people for everything that it's done in the last 20 years, and say, "Listen, we're going to have another war. We're going to have to raise your taxes. We're going to go and create some giant bureaucracy that you don't even know about. We're going to have to raise your taxes. We're going to interfere in governments around the world, and we're going to invest in all these projects around the world that none of you can know about. We're going to have to raise your taxes." Well, the American people would have 20 years ago said no to that. But because they paid for it all with debt, they never, the American people, the taxpayer, never felt it. No one ever actually had to write a check for 20 years of war, or write a check for the payments we give to the United Nations, or the money we give to both sides of the Israeli-Hamas thing. We don't actually write checks for any of this, so the American people are able to quietly ignore it and go about their business. It's really quite an insidious thing, because this unlimited credit allows governments to do things that are way outside what it should be doing, that the American public would never support, would never pay for.
Right.
But because it's just put on the credit card. When you see local governments doing that, when you see a county that goes out and does a big bond offering because they want to spend a bunch of money, typically among their donors, because they don't want to have to go to the public and say, "Listen, we're going to create something that you're probably not going to want to pay for, but you got to pay more in taxes." They're not doing that. They're doing it with debt. Anything paid for with debt is suspect, right? If it can't be paid for out of current receipts going into the local government, then maybe they should do what corporations do and stop and think, should we cut back? Do we have too many employees? Are employees not productive enough? Why is government immune to that? Debt.
Yep.
So
exactly.
it's a really critical thing.
And
one other point on this, very quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I wanted to throw in because
thing,
there was some I was at Washington D.C. this week, and I watched a speech from Nayib Bukele, El Salvador, and I honestly did not realize this, but you brought up a good point on the debt, which I want to bring up for folks, is that the taxes that people pay, the way he described it, I thought was fascinating. It's like, whatever. That's not really paying bills. That's control. That's a way to keep the people in control. We are buying things by just printing money. And if people out there do a quick search on debt owned or debt held by the Federal Reserve, the Fed, you will see this exponential growth, which basically shows that this federal government, controlled by the leftists, they want to go buy things that we don't have money for. So how do they do that? Well, they go sell bonds. Well, who's buying these bonds now? The Fed, just by printing money. So it's just this endless cycle that the taxpayers aren't even part of that loop. And we have to get the accountability back and pay for things based on the money that we have, and not this imaginary money that only keeps the government controlling its own programs outside the purview of the American citizen.
Well, Lizzie Fletcher, go ahead. Go, G2, please.
You should only be expanding your money supply when you've got some economic reason to do so, right? But here what we're doing is having government spend now $2 trillion more a year than it takes in, and they're funding that with the debt you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that you're saying is going from the U.S. Treasury, which issues the debt, and the Fed's buying it. In other words, it's not going out to private investors. A lot of people think China buys our debt.
Right.
China and Japan stopped buying our debt around 2015. They have actually been reducing their holdings of U.S. debt because they see the U.S. first as a greater risk all the time as debt accumulates, and because strategically China doesn't need to hold our money anymore. They have our entire They have our entire semiconductor in it. Well, not all of it, but they make every phone we use. They make all the pharmaceuticals we take. They don't need to hold our debt to have influence here. So they're playing down their exposure to U.S. dollars. And so how is it real when you're saying we don't have an economic need, we have a government that wants to spend, so we're going to issue all this debt and pump a bunch of money into the economy, and the debt's going to be purchased by the Fed? You know, one of the great myths is this Social Security Trust Fund. And the myth about it is that it has a $2.8 trillion surplus. If you look at the books for Social Security, it will show that from 1983 to 2021, taxpayers paid more in Social Security taxes than were being consumed by workers who were drawing money out of Social Security. But that flipped in 21. So from 83 to 21, there was a surplus in Social Security. In 21, taxes paid in all of a sudden were less than the money Social Security was needing. Well, what happened with the $2.9 trillion surplus? It was all invested in government debt. So now, in order to fund current Social Security, they've got to take money out of the federal budget outside of the Social Security Trust Fund, and put it into the Social Security system because the taxes we are paying aren't sufficient to cover Social Security costs. Mm-hmm. That's a disaster. In other words, 2.9 trillion extra paid in, they took it and spent it, replaced it with government debt that'll never be repaid. And to keep the thing going, they have to keep printing more money. It is, in fact, the definition of what's called a Ponzi scheme, where you just take money from one investor to give it to another when there's no underlying business making any money. It's a Ponzi scheme.
So I think that what further exposes that they have no interest in fixing this is they pass the Inflation Reduction Act, and it doesn't even mention the Fed. So our listeners today got a greater education on the real issues than anything that Congress is proposing as a solution. If you take the content from the show and begin calling Lizzie Fletcher's office, you'll be ahead above the education level of their staff members. But what was the Inflation Reduction Act filled with? It was filled with green new energy deals. It was filled with energy programs that are that are inefficient and unaffordable, all alternative energy solutions. It was filled with, and again, it was filled with a tax at the gas pump. So it's a bait and switch with our political officials. They are purposely keeping us away from the real issue, which we're addressing on the show, which is the Federal Reserve. Were you going to say something, Bobby?
No, I mean this is good, and again, reminding people of how these local elections really have an impact and what these local Democrats are doing as opposed to what they should be doing. And it's up to all of us. You know, this radio program is outstanding in getting that message out. And people, it's coming up. You know, you have a chance to jump into the Republican primary coming up. It's ongoing with early voting, and make these decisions. Help us put together a great slate so that in November you can go out and vote for people that will turn this around.
So, Bobby, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So, locally in Fort Bend County, what I see with my neighbors is a lot of people that are on fixed incomes. A lot of elderly. Now, I'd like to make the point that when the Federal Reserve raised interest rates at this level that's never been done before, at the same time, BlackRock sets up a fund. BlackRock is maybe the largest corporation in existence. They set up a fund to buy homes for people that default on loans. So the Fed raises rates. We know that's going to put people in a pinch. People are going to default. And there comes BlackRock buying up the home market for pennies on the dollar. This can only be described as a conspiracy. And and you can call me any name in the book. I don't care. It cannot be a coincidence that BlackRock sets up that fund. But my question to Bobby is this: do you see? I mean, I can only imagine in Fort Bend County we have people hurting from this, our elderly people. And where are our county officials on this type of an issue, which I think would be a legitimate issue for our county officials to make awareness on?
I mean, I encourage people to go to Commissioner's Court and ask them about this, because you see what's happening, you know, just down the road with this colony thing that they've got going on with kind of bogus financing on that to illegal aliens. And I mean, people are struggling here, and you can get these sweetheart deals over there to people that aren't even citizens. So we need to clean up this economy. We need to do it in Fort Bend County, and we need to hold these people accountable. Not just the government officials in the legislative sense, but our DA, our sheriff, our judges. It all comes down to every one of those areas plays a role in advancing or combating this leftist agenda. The way they've taken over the DAs and the courts and law enforcement, we have to fight back against that, and we have a chance to do that if people will just go vote.
G2, were you going to say something?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, and at the risk of being somewhat repetitive, this Constitution we have is dependent upon an active citizenry that's involved. And Americans for so many decades have been really just able to coast and trust the system that we've gotten ourselves into this position. And your point, Bobby, that this is not just the national. We all focus on who's president. Presidential elections get a lot of turnout. But the sheriff and your local commissioners, these are critical roles that have a huge impact on your lives. People don't often understand how important those roles are. One of the most important county-level things, of course, is running elections. There's a lot of concern about the validity of our elections in this country now that we've never had before. That all comes back to your county officials who are responsible for running them. So to be an active citizenry, to make sure that the United States gets back on the track that our Constitution laid out, that created this wonderful, unique, extraordinary nation that we all enjoy, to do that requires an active citizenry. So how do we do that? You're saying, okay, wait, you can donate your time and donate your money to local campaigns. You've got to get out and vote. But before you go vote, you have to spend a few minutes learning which candidates are just pushing this leftist agenda and which are really pushing the agenda of getting our justice system back on track and getting our Constitution back. It doesn't take long to figure it out, but you got to figure it out. And then vote and donate time and donate money. A $25 donation to a local candidate is really, really important. They generally don't have a lot of cash. And a $25 donation from the citizen means they're not so beholden to the larger donor who might be giving them $5,000 or $10,000. So it's really important, and I hope that everybody takes away from these kinds of discussions, not, hey, it's hopeless, there's nothing we could do, the enemy is overwhelming. No. There's one force in the world capable of fixing this, and it is the American people, the citizen who's empowered to vote.
And I like how this conversation is going because, again, we are not Sean Hannity pounding our fists at the wall with no solutions. We're not doing that. We are bringing this to you locally, to your doorstep. There are action items that you can get involved right now and be a part of this. Bobby Eberle is the Fort Bend County Republican Party chairman. He plays a very large role locally in local politics. Just a couple of things about what's happening in the Republican Party right now. It is really a momentous time for that party. There seems to be some sort of a surge of energy in it right now. Recently, a local activist group called Freedom Matters Action Group, which is just a group of citizens in Fort Bend County, Freedom Matters Action Group had a county-level Republican primary debate. So 4 years ago, people were asleep at the wheel. Today, we are having county-level Republican primary debates. That is unheard of. That is one of a kind. That is a great, great thing in Fort Bend County and gives you an idea of the type of momentum that's happening in Fort Bend. But with that being said, Bobby, I want to ask you, can you give me a state on the Republican Party in Fort Bend County today?
Yeah, I mean, we've got big races coming up, and we see an energy that we hadn't seen before. Coming in when I took over, we hadn't won any countywide races since 2016. We came this last election, we split with the Dems. We won 6, they won 7. And we also able to win 4 more crucial seats on the 1st and 14th Court of Appeals, major courts that cover 10 counties. We've got great candidates on those. and we are fighting the battleground really this time around Precinct 3 area, which is high in the South Asian population. That's going to be the battleground. So I encourage people to get to know the candidates and get to know the issues and ask yourself basic questions. You know, are you sick of open borders? Are you sick of high crime? You sick of woke schools? I mean, if you just answer yes to those questions, it's not hard. You have a clear choice to make, and that would be voting Republican.
So I can list right now a number of things that citizens can begin doing today to take back their county. Number one, they can start calling their county officials. And everybody calls the Republicans because I think because they're afraid of the Democrats, right? Because Democrats are fighters. And so we cannot just call the Republicans. When we have an issue, we have to call the Republicans and call the Democrats, even if we know the Democrats are stated opposed to the issue that you're calling. Call both parties. Call your local representatives. Go to county commissioner's court. Go to your school board meetings and seek out these activist groups. Seek out the Republican Party. Become a part of it. These are the types of things that you can do today to begin taking back your county and get in on this movement. With that being said, G2, can you tell me a little bit about your area and activism locally up there and how it works?
Well, in the different areas that I'm involved with, there are strong patriot groups that are working very, very hard on two issues. One is election integrity, because we know we have an election systems problem in this nation. Fraud was a real problem in 20. It was a real problem in 16. In fact, we've gone back and identified it all the way back to 13 and 14. So it's been a growing problem. So there's a huge amount of effort by citizens and patriots across the country. And their demand is really simple. We want secure elections that are transparent so we can be comfortable that they're legitimate. And the second side is communicating, just like we're doing now. It's having town halls and having meetings and doing radio shows and things so that the citizens can get a better understanding of what's going on, understand that at a local level, and understand how they can have an impact. So it's exactly this. And I can tell you that inside the Republican Party in counties all across the country, there's this struggle, believe it or not, between the leftists and the sort of constitutional patriot or the conservative. And what I see in Fort Bend that's really encouraging, I see that shifting. And across Texas, it seems to me that the people, the voters, the Republican base, and the citizens are winning. They're gaining ground. And the establishment that operates on their own interests, in their own interests, and operates without any loyalty to their voters, they seem to be losing ground in Texas and specifically in Fort Bend County. So this is a really exciting time down there. Well, I could tell you it's not that way in every county.
You know, Fort Bend County, throughout its history, it's been a Republican county. It's only in the past maybe 5 years that it became a Democrat majority county. And when the Democrats came into Fort Bend, they came in with a head of steam. They were implementing a full Marxist globalist agenda, one that is completely foreign to Fort Bend County. We've never had that sort of ideology penetrate Fort Bend before. And I'll just give you one idea that the Fort Bend County Democrats were implementing on Fort Bend County citizens. They deployed a medical surveillance campaign where county officials would come to your doorstep, knock on your door, and ask you intimate questions about your medical history and if you had been vaccinated. And if you don't see the totalitarian element in that, then I can't help you, because it's seriously totalitarian. What happened is county citizens confronted the county Democrats, and the Democrats put down the project. It's one more example of activism in Fort Bend County. I'll give you one more example. When the Democrats took over Fort Bend County about 4 years ago or so, they began a propaganda effort through the police officials, where they began to describe county residents that do not vote Democrat, county residents that do not support the Democrats, essentially county residents who vote for President Trump. They began with this propaganda campaign that this is the new terrorist and all of this nonsense. And again, county residents, the expectation is that the people of Fort Bend would hunker down and get scared and go away, but Fort Bend County people are more resilient than that. So they stood up to this message and they challenged it. They exposed it, and the message went away. So activism in every instance, activism is the answer. We can take back our country. We have them outnumbered maybe 10,000 to 1. And all we need to do is become more politically active. Bobby, in the last minutes, I'll give you the final thoughts. How do people learn more about Fort Bend County Republicans, and what are the next steps for Fort Bend County to restore itself?
Well, sure. Yeah. And again, Chris, I love being on the show today. Thank you so much. This is great. I know you got a great future with this, but if people want to get involved, go to our website. The Fort Bend County GOP's website has a ton of information on candidates and a ton of information on how to get active. That's fbcgop.org. Fill out our contact form. Fill out our volunteer form. I guarantee within a day, someone will be contacting you because we want to get people involved. We've got new people moving in, and that's the best way is contact us. We'll plug you in, whether it's political activities or grassroots volunteering or communications. There's a lot of ways for people to get involved, and we look forward to meeting you.
Excellent. Very good. And with that being said, this is the Chris Heasley Show. I want to thank my guest, G2. I want to thank Bobby Eberle. And I want to... Again, please come back to our show. We'll be here every Monday at 10 a.m. with the same message, which is Harris County, Fort Bend County. We need you to start getting involved